How much have super PACs affected the modern political spectrum?
The first period, there was an extraordinary amount of money on the right. And then the left learned how to raise money for super PACs. So right now, it basically is a wash. It's just an arms race. But it's an arms race among the most wealthy on the left and the right. We will win. Kamala Harris was attacked by Bernie because Bernie said she didn't talk about issues ordinary Americans cared about. She couldn't talk about issues ordinary Americans cared about because she had hundreds of millions of dollars in super PAC money inside her campaign that was basically drawing these fences around the issues that she could address openly and strongly. And that made it harder and harder for her to connect to ordinary Americans.
All right. The man, the machine, the legend, Lawrence Lessig, one of the most senior and distinguished professors at Harvard, holding the Roy L. Furman Chair that recognizes his leadership in law, ethics, and democracy reform. Founder, Equal Citizens and Creative Commons, author of 13 books, advocate in the Maine campaign finance reform case, which I want to talk about today, and led multiple constitutional reform efforts around gerrymandering, voting rights, and political accountability. Lawrence, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Shane.
I know you don't have a lot of time. In fact, I think you have to go teach a class at Harvard, so we don't want to keep you from educating our young brains, but we want you to educate us. And I guess we can jump in right away. I want to get to a few things. But today I was researching, and 2026 is going to be the most expensive electoral cycle in history. So that's the modern little take. The old take is, quote, I don't care who does the electing as long as I get to do the nominating, a quote by Boss Tweed in the 1800s. So I know you have a big case happening in Maine. Why Maine, and what's the case, and why is it so important?
Well, let's start with the third question first. Okay. Why is it so important? You know, I think all of us have a sense that our politics has been taken over by money. And politicians spend an extraordinary amount of their time raising money. In the book that I first wrote about this, we surveyed and discovered politicians spending anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money, which means they're spending a majority of their time just sucking up to people with power to get the money they need to run their campaigns or to get their party back into power. And that's not even counting super PACs. They then spend a chunk of their time trying to inspire people to give money to their super PACs. And so I think that's produced this impression, and it's a justified impression of most Americans, that the first people our representatives care about are the people with the money. And that's why the Boss Tweed quote that you just gave us is so valuable. What Tweed was saying is, look, he said, I don't care who does the electing as long as I do the nominating. And what that signaled is he understood that if he got to pick the people who the people got to vote among, didn't matter who the people picked because he knew he controlled them because he picked them first. Well, that's what money does in the American political system. Like, you want to be a candidate, you first got to please the people with money. And then you please the people with money, Democratic, Republican, doesn't matter. Then we, the people, get to vote. But the point is, the people with the money know that the only people who are getting elected are the people that, in some sense, they haven't blocked or they have approved. And that's what's produced really the inverse of what James Madison promised. Madison promised us a democracy where the government would be, quote, dependent on the people alone. And then in Federalist 57, he went on to say, by the people, he meant not the rich more than the poor. Well, we've produced a democracy where it is the rich more than the poor that our politicians care about. And that's why there's so much frustration on the right and the left. I think justifiable populist frustration with the system of government we've evolved.
Yeah, I remember I was spending some time in the Obama White House, and this was the era of no votes for the Republican Party for any Democratic bill or law. Right. So, the Tea Party, lots of partisan fighting. And someone was explaining to me that all that really mattered were the Supreme Court nominations, because not only is the Congress and the executive sort of galvanized into inactivity, they're fighting so much and partisanship has become so fierce that it's going to be elevated to the Supreme Court. So whoever gets the most nominations on the Supreme Court, therefore would have, the advantage. How important is the Supreme Court today in running America? And was that sort of the prediction and or intention of the forefather?
Well, the Supreme Court's become extremely important because they've taken onto themselves the right to make decisions that are really beyond the scope of the Constitution. They've become the policymakers in chief. And I think that's been especially true in the context of our political process. So, they've issued a series of decisions about money in politics that have inspired the craziness that we see right now. They've taken on a vision of the executive that in my, 20 years ago, my colleague Cass Sunstein and I wrote a piece about the original understanding of the executive power. And the current idea of the executive power really has no connection to what our framers imagined when they enacted the Constitution. It's just these justices' conception of the power that the executive is supposed to have. And so they've seen themselves more and more at the center of deciding really important democratic questions, which is bizarre from a historical perspective because, just 50 years ago, the whole purpose of the conservative legal movement was to say, hey, judges, back off. It's not your job to make these political judgments. That's for the elected representatives to make. You enforce the Constitution, at least where the Constitution's clear, and otherwise step aside. But we've seen this court in particular become more and more aggressive. Now, I don't think it's as bad in the money in politics context as some do. That's why, we have the first question, the really exciting question you asked for me about what's going on in Maine, I think is a real chance to give the court a chance to clarify, I call out a mistake that lower courts have made interpreting their own opinions. So most people, like Bernie Sanders, will say super PACs are a destruction of American democracy, and I completely agree with that. But then he'll go on to say, so therefore we have to overturn Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision from 2010 that said you can spend unlimited amounts of money as long as it was independent of a political campaign. And that statement by Bernie Sanders is just wrong because Citizens United did not create the super PAC. The super PAC was created by a lower federal court case called Speech Now 3 months after Citizens United. And that is the case that created this huge industry of spending that goes on right now, super PACs, and the huge chunk of that, which is dark money, we don't even know where it's coming from.
Maybe just explain what a super PAC is.
Yeah, so an ordinary political action committee is allowed to receive money that it then spends politically to support or oppose a campaign. And if it does it coordinated with the campaign, then the most it can accept is, I think the limit now is $5,000. So you can give it up to $5,000 and it can spend that in a campaign. Because of this lower federal court decision, Speech Now, in 2010, the court said that it was illegal under the First Amendment to limit the size of the contribution you make to that to an independent political action committee. So that used to be limited at $5,000. And after this decision, there were no limits to it. So that means you can give $100 million. Elon gave $277 million to these independent political action committees that then spent their money to elect President Trump. And so the point is, once the limits are gone, these billionaires spend an extraordinary amount of money giving into these committees. And in the last election cycle, 75% of the money in these political action committees came from people giving $1 million or more. So this is a very small number of people who are giving this extraordinary amount of money, which is now controlling really what politicians can talk about, because they know that if they say the wrong thing, these super PACs will sweep in and punish them. And so they've become very good and disciplined in the face of these super PACs. And so these super PACs have become the dominant form of political spending for federal elections right now. But we believe, and I think it's now pretty clear this is true, that they're based on a mistake that the Supreme Court has never had the chance to review. So what we've done in Maine is Maine has passed an initiative by 75% of the vote, which is the largest number of people, 600,000 people, to vote for anything in the history of Maine, any candidate or any initiative. And what that signals for a purple state like Maine is this issue is completely nonpartisan. Like people on the left and people on the right hate these super PACs. And so this initiative said no more super PACs in Maine. The most you can give to a committee that's spending independently is $5,000. And that was immediately challenged by two super PACs. And now we're in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. And in the First Circuit Court of Appeals, we believe we're going to be able to show that the decisions that gave us super PACs are just based on a mistake. And once that mistake is corrected, then we'll go to the Supreme Court and we'll say to the Supreme Court, look, apply your doctrine. Don't change your doctrine. Just apply your existing doctrine to a set of facts you've never considered. And if you do that, you will agree with us that the people of Maine and the United States have the ability to limit the size of these contributions and thereby end super PACs in America.
Football season is upon us, and this season we've teamed up with BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we have special offers for our listeners every single week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code SHANE, that's Shaney, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Just make sure you use bonus code SHANE when you sign up. And don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code SHANE and get up to $1,500 first bet offer today. And so if this happens in Maine, it would knock on to the rest of the states sort of automatically, or it goes to the Supreme Court, or how does that work?
Right. So if we win in the First Circuit, which is the appellate court that governs Maine and Massachusetts and Rhode Island and and actually Puerto Rico too. If we win in the First Circuit, then the Supreme Court will have to take this up. And when we win in the Supreme Court, then not only will Maine no longer have super PACs, but there's a federal law that was struck down in 2010 in the case Speech Now that would be revived. It would come back to life. And that federal law would limit super PACs nationally as well. So we think there's a clear shot to end super PACs by the 2028 election, not just in the state of Maine and a couple other states, but in the federal elections as well, which would be incredibly important for this upcoming presidential election.
And how much or little have super PACs affected the modern political spectrum since 2010?
Well, there's been, at the first period since 2010, there was an extraordinary amount of money on the right that came in through these super PACs. And then the left learned how to raise money for super PACs. So right now, it basically is a wash. It's just an arms race, but it's an arms race among the most wealthy on the left and the right. So, it's not that there's, just partisan on one side. There's partisan on both sides. But of course, the sort of issues that the most wealthy, whether you're conservative or liberal, care about are not the sort of issues that the average American cares about. The average super wealthy conservative is not caring about the average of the conservatives in America, and the same thing on the left. So this is the way in which our politics becomes tilted, extremely sensitive to what the wealthiest in America care about, which is why it's very hard for the politicians to talk about the sort of thing that average Americans on the right or the left might care about, because they
give me some examples. I mean, who funds the right super PACs and who funds the left super PACs, and why?
Well, so one thing that they both seem to agree on is that we shouldn't have any tax reform. We have this huge deficit, and there's a huge amount of money that's just literally sitting on the table for tax collectors to collect. But we can't get any agreement on the left or the right to do the kind of tax reform that would make it possible for us to collect, even just to collect the money that's already owed, let alone address some of the extraordinary loopholes, like carried interest loopholes that give extraordinary benefits to the super wealthy in America. And so you've got this reality where the politicians are really good at knowing what lines they can't cross. And those are invisible lines because they're not like written down anywhere. They're invisible lines, but they're lines drawn on the basis of the structure of these super PACs. And that's what we've got to end. Especially on the, for Democrats. I think, Kamala Harris was attacked by Bernie after the election because Bernie said she didn't talk about issues ordinary Americans cared about. And I felt sorry for her because she couldn't talk about issues ordinary Americans cared about because she had hundreds of millions of dollars in super PAC money inside her campaign that was basically drawing these fences around the issues that she could address openly and strongly. And that made it harder and harder for her to connect to ordinary Americans. And so I think this is the critical first step we've got to take to wipe these off the table so that we can begin to have a politics that's caring about voters rather than the tweeds, as you described them, the boss tweed effect of like caring about who's going to do the nominating by giving them the money they need to be able to get into these campaigns.
Some of the big, obviously, historically anyway, on the right, let's say guns or oil or the NRA, people who were aligned. And then on the left, big pharma. But now it seems in the last election anyway, that like you said, it's an arms race with both sides running kind of nearly equal and getting money from both sides, just hedging their bets, saying as long as one of our candidates win, we're going to get it. And I think we noticed a lot of that with high tech and the sort of high tech spending. And I think in Trump's inauguration, you had the four biggest heads of trying to outbid each other to give him money. But maybe explain a little bit about who are the biggest donators.
Well, right now, in the last election, obviously Elon was one of the biggest, but the tech bros were also huge. And the most significant super PAC in 2024 was actually the crypto super PAC. So crypto policy under the Biden administration could be criticized. We have a stupid policy system for addressing regulation in this context. It's the SEC, and the SEC has to litigate in order to set new rules. Like other countries basically have rule makers who set new rules, but they had to go out and sue people to set the new rules that would govern crypto. So you could criticize that process and you could criticize the particular rules they were pushing for. But we've now seen crypto policy flipped completely after the 2024 election. And I think it's like some of the dumbest possible crypto policy you could embrace because it's now going to encourage extraordinary fleecing of ordinary consumers through these crypto devices. But they accomplished that flipping by this powerful super PAC that was almost like a PAC in the way that it functioned. It went out there and targeted certain members of Congress, told them, we're going to take these guys out, said to other people, we'll support your campaign if you'll signal your support for crypto, and overnight flipped Congress so that Congress is now totally in favor of deregulation in the context of crypto. And it flipped the president, who originally had said crypto was a scam, and then came around to say it was the greatest technical innovation since sliced bread, so long as all of the Bitcoin would be mined in the United States. Completely idiotic statement to make about the way crypto would work. So the point is, this now is a model for how you buy policy in America. And we've now seen the AI companies step up and say that they are going to build the same super PAC for 2026 and for 2028. And so this is why there's almost a race to turn off this weapon before it gets deployed even more powerfully to disable our government from being able to regulate in these incredibly important places to be able to regulate sensibly for. And so that's what the hope is with this initiative in Maine, that this could trigger the opportunity to flip this game around?
So it's a massive initiative. Probably we're not hearing enough about it, which is why I wanted to get you on today. And I know you're busy, but this is affecting our democracy, the fairness and freedom of our elections. Again, I started with the 2026 electoral cycle is going to be the most expensive ever, so this is going to get bigger. I want to go back a little bit to gaslighting, fake news. So, Trump famously would say some things that weren't true, whatever, and people would say that's fake news, that's fake news. And in a stroke of genius, he said, no, you're fake news. And so all of a sudden, mainstream news became fake news, and everything was fake news. And now we have the collapse of trust in in mainstream news. When we look at what's happening here, the new fake news, if you will, is lawfare. People are saying, well, they're just suing me to, make my life hard, or they're just using the courts as a personal thing, and they're using the DOJ to go after me. Trump said it when Biden was in, and then, now the Bidens are saying that, Hunter Biden, they went after me. We pardoned him because, they're just using the courts as sort of, eye for an eye, canon law, Albania kind of vibe. But lawfare has become this term that's thrown around. What does it mean? What's it referring to? And is it real or is it fake news?
Yeah, so, I think most people think that lawfare really began in the Paula Jones case. Most people don't remember Paula Jones, but Paula Jones accused Bill Clinton of sexual misconduct, and her litigation was funded by a bunch of right-wing organizations who were keen to embarrass the president during his presidency. And so there was very clearly this effort to deploy legal means to wage a political war. And it's been done by both sides. So there's a DA named Earl who's a Democrat who took on Tom DeLay and won a conviction originally, and that was reversed. And then there was eventually acquitted. And the claim was that Earl was targeting him for political reasons. There was a Democratic governor in Alabama called Don Siegelman, who really angered Karl Rove because he was like a Democrat they couldn't get rid of. And so they brought litigation against Siegelman, and many believe that was partisan motivated litigation. So the point is, it happened a lot in the 90s and then in the early 2000s. But it really ramped up, and it's ramped up now in this current administration. And of course, you're right. Trump justifies everything he's doing by saying, yeah, that's just what the Bidens did. I don't think that's a fair characterization of just what the Bidens did, because the difference is, I think the prosecutors face a real challenge when you've got a clear and wanton violation of law just before you. I mean, we didn't get to see the case against the president for the classified documents in Florida because a Trump-appointed judge basically walked that case until it was the end of the Biden administration. But the way in which the president was handling those documents and refusing to cooperate with the archive as they tried to reclaim these documents, and was, self-consciously directing people to hide or destroy these documents, was really unprecedented. We'd never seen anything like that. And if you look at the exchange with the government and the president, where they're saying, hey, come on, the law says you've got to give these to us. Please let us get them. We're going to come and get them. And there was a constant effort to stop that. That was just plain violation of the law because he believed the law didn't apply to him. So, there's a question of like, well, do you get to do whatever you want just because you were the president or just because you're a political person? And if ever you're criticized or prosecuted, that becomes just lawfare. And that's obviously can't be the case. Like, you've got to be able to prosecute people who self-consciously violate the law, which forces us to have to ask, is there a strong basis for your prosecution? So if you apply that test, I think there's clearly a strong basis for the litigation that went against President Trump. I mean, the New York litigation, there was a grand jury and then a jury who convicted the president, 34 counts of felony counts against him. And, if we can't trust what a jury is going to do, we don't have a legal system anymore. And the same thing, with respect to, I think the documents cases, and the first impeachment and the second impeachment, I think these are all cases where there was a strong claim against him. The cases which he pursued are really, I'm not sure it's lawfare or it's just extortion. When you sue 60 Minutes because you say they edited an interview, and by that he just means that there's a long answer, and in a morning advertisement they showed one part of the answer, and in an evening advertisement they showed a different part of the answer. That's the editing of the answer. And when you sue 60 Minutes and you say you want $16 million in damage because that hurt you. And how did it hurt you? You won the election. So what is your harm from editing an answer that Kamala Harris gives you? The answer is there's no legal basis to that claim.
But he won that, didn't he?
Well, he won that in the sense that they gave in. They settled the case. They paid him $16 million for a case that had no legal basis. Now, why did they do that? Well, because he's a great extortionist. He knows how to set the price. If you set the price low enough, it will always be sensible, the rational thing to do for the other side to pay. If you set it too high, you said, the whole company, they wouldn't settle. But you set it high enough so that normal people look at it and say, wow, $16 million. They must have done something wrong. But the answer is no, they did nothing wrong. They did what the free press is supposed to do. And the First Amendment absolutely would have protected 60 Minutes, would have protected ABC, would have protected Facebook, would have protected X, would have protected Amazon.
But why settle it? It means that they can't be free journalists anymore.
That's exactly right. This is terrifying. Every source of independent power in America has signaled that they're going to give in to the extortionists because it's cheaper to give in. I mean, look at the 9 law firms who settled with the president on the basis of claims which every court to look at those claims has concluded they were completely illegal, unconstitutional claims against those law firms. 4 law firms.
Why would they settle?
Because they think it's cheaper to settle than it is to fight. And the law firms said things like, well, it's existential. Like if we don't settle, it'll be the end of the law firm. And you got to say, look, a law firm is a piece of paper. What are you talking about? If it's the end of the law firm, so what? You're still lawyers. You can still go out and get a different job. Maybe your bonus this year won't be as high. Okay. So you're going to lose some money, but you won't lose your integrity. You won't lose the honor that you have as a lawyer who stands up for what's right and doesn't cave just whenever you're threatened. And so we've seen that with the law firms. We see this with the press. We see this with these companies in the context of giving in over benefits that will get them tariff exemptions. We've seen it with the universities. I mean, my university so far has not settled, although I'm not sure how long that will last. UCLA will never settle because Gavin Newsom has a political reason to say to them, that's a state university, they are not going to settle. But these others settle. And again, it's because the lawyers sitting in the president's office say to them, well, the cost of settling is this, and the cost of fighting is that. And it turns out that is 10 times the cost of settling.
More importantly, the insurance companies say, to fight it is $1 million, to settle is $100,000. You're going to pay the $100,000 every time, which leads us to the largest question of tort reform, which is America, I believe, is the only country where you can sue somebody for anything, get a lawyer and not pay them a percentage of what you potentially can win. And if you lose, it doesn't have to have you don't have to go through any pretrial basis. It can be specious, it can be spurious, and you can go do it. You can sue anybody for anything. And if you lose, you don't have to pay their legal fees. You don't have to pay damages. You just go, okay, everybody go their way, leading to everyone sues everything for everything. And insurance ends up running it because insurance just says, well, we'll pay this amount, and then if it's above that amount, we'll go to court, and if it's below that amount, we'll pay insurance. It's broken system. Fix it for us, please. How is it that we're the only country in the world that has a system like that?
Yeah. I mean, the legal system is like the healthcare system. It's extremely expensive and extremely bad. We get nothing for what we're paying. And by that, I mean, if you look at just, when a person is hurt and they're entitled to some recovery, what percentage of that recovery do they get? And the answer is the tort system gives them something like 7% of the harm that they're getting comes from the tort recovery they get. And that is a terribly inefficient system. And, if you look at the total amount for every dollar that's spent in the tort system, it's something like 47 cents is going to go to the actual plaintiff. And of that, almost all of it is going to go for the expenses that the plaintiff has in bringing these claims. And so
much more goes to the lawyer than to the plaintiff.
And to the insurance and to all these other costs. And so we have a system which is not actually compensating people for harms that they've actually suffered. I mean, the most egregious example of this is in the context of what you call wage theft, which is where a company is not paying what they're supposed to be paying people for their wages. The biggest chunk of this is going to be for minimum wage theft, which is something like $15 billion a year. But all wage theft together is something like $50 billion a year. And the legal system succeeds in recovering $3 billion of that. $3 billion out of about $50 billion a year. Now, just to keep that in perspective, every year there's about $500 million to about $0.5 to $0.6 billion a year in robbery costs. The total amount of robbery in America is about $500 million to $600 million a year. But we have $50 billion in wage theft. Now, we have cop shows about robberies. We don't have cop shows about wage theft or recovering wage theft. And that's, again, just measuring how terrible the legal system is in delivering benefits to, the people who need the benefits the most. Surprise, surprise. Like, there should be no surprise about this in a Boss Tweed world that you started our interview with, that the system is very good at bending in favor of the most powerful and not very good at delivering the benefits that the ordinary American should be entitled to. Now,
just to be clear, we have every cop show about the robbery of the 0.5 billion, but the 50 billion is boring companies not paying their workers enough, or insurance taking too much, or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, wage theft is literally like I'm owed $2,000 and you're paying me $1,000. And so I could decide to go sue. But 98% of these people, literally, that's a number, 98% of these people are forced into arbitration. And those arbitration practices are extremely skewed against the worker. So my point is, this system is just terrible at delivering services to ordinary Americans. And that's just the same way it is all over, because you've got this corrupted political system that doesn't care about answering the needs of ordinary people. It cares about answering the needs of the most wealthy. So we've got, this, what people refer to as this compensation gap, like, in the ordinary tort system, meaning the gap between how much people collect and how much harm has actually been caused. That compensation gap has not been studied comprehensively in 35 years. The last estimates we have are 35 years ago. But for the last 35 years, business has done everything they can to convince the ordinary American that we're living in this crazy legal system where people are suing and getting all sorts of recoveries for things that they didn't actually suffer. The McDonald's coffee spill case, like all of these cases, again and again, they tell these stories, and people think that you've got these people winning the lottery by going and suing people. People never get the money that they are under the system entitled to, given the ordinary system we've got right now. 55% of tort victims get anything. 2/3 get 75% of what they are entitled to. And in one study that looked at a wide range of cases, 0 people who had claims for more than $25,000 got the full compensation for the harm that the law recognized that they were entitled to recover for. So we have a system that's actually not doing anything substantial for ordinary people.
Hello, Bango, and welcome to our BetMGM lightning round. And don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code Shane and get up to $1,500 first bet offer today. 2 minutes lightning round just for us to go. If you have to bet on one reform passing in your lifetime, ranked choice voting, campaign finance limits, or Supreme Court term limits, which makes it through first?
Campaign finance.
Campaign finance, we love it because that's you. What's more likely, overturning Citizens United or Congress passing an ethics bill that actually works?
I think they're both unlikely. We're not going to overturn Citizens United, and Congress doesn't do anything.
Okay. Which will regulate AI or political influence first, lawmakers or the algorithms themselves?
The algorithms.
Wow. Who's more dangerous to democracy, dark money or disinformation?
I think dark money.
Dark money. If the Constitution were rewritten today, what's the one clause you draft so clearly that no billionaire or lawyer could ever twist it?
Wow. You know, I teach constitutional law. You can't tell me I just get one. That's like, yeah, I think the one I would strike is that, the one clause we would have is that we have to have, a representative, democracy where citizens have equal power, including, the ability to make sure that money doesn't dominate the political process.
Okay, last one. Who's really running the table in American politics? Wall Street, Silicon Valley, or K Street?
K Street is Wall Street and Silicon Valley. So K Street.
So we have a corrupt system that's run by money, and nowhere more than in our electoral process is it skewed and biased by this dark money, super PACs. You're fighting against it. What can we do to help? Why is Maine so important? And what should we be doing going forward?
Well, I think that Maine is important because it gives us a chance at getting rid of the worst of it, which is the super PACs. And I think, you know, I really encourage people to understand why we've got a real shot here. You know, the most lawyers will look at this and say, no, you can't possibly win this. Indeed, I recruited our lawyer, Neil Katyal, who just argued the tariff case last week in the Supreme Court. And when I called Neil about this, he's a friend for many, many years. You know, he avoided my calls for about a month. And finally I got him and he said, look, Larry, it's a loser. I don't take losers. This is a total loser. And I said, Neil, just sit down with me for one lunch. So he took me to the biggest restaurant in Washington. And halfway through the lunch, he said to me, holy, you're right. We can win this case. I can win this case. And it takes a little bit to see why. But once you see why we have been living under this insane system for 15 years with no justification. The Supreme Court didn't do this. It's embarrassing as a lawyer. I make lawyers for a living. It's embarrassing for the legal profession that for 15 years, we've lived with this corrupted political process called super PACs for no good reason. And I, you know, I've been fighting this for a long time. We filed our appellate brief in the First Circuit. A week after that, 9 amicus briefs, meaning briefs written by people not connected to us, were filed in the case supporting us, including one by Mark Cuban and Steve Jurvetson and William Van Mufflen and Vin Ryan and Reid Hoffman, 5 billionaires, who said, this is a corrupt system and you've got to end it. And by every campaign finance organization, all of them saying, yes, it's absolutely a mistake that you need to correct in order to end these super PACs. And if you go to our website, equalcitizens.us, you can download this book that we put together called Friends of a Corruption-Free Democracy, that bundles all of these amicus briefs together. And you just read them, even, you don't know anything about law. If you read them, you will see we're going to win this. We're going to spread this understanding so that people begin to understand there is something to fight for here. And if we win this, then the next step will be to take on the way we fund campaigns, change the way we fund campaigns, so we can have candidates who care about the people and not care about just the money.
Fighting for nothing less than our democracy. Lawrence Lessig, he's a smart man. He makes lawyers for a living, and thank God he does, because at least some lawyers are coming out formed in the right way. Lawrence Lessig, thanks for your time. Good luck in Maine, and let's talk after you win.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Hi, it's Shane Smith. I wanted to let you know about my new Substack. I'm shanesmith.substack.com. Now, I'm going to be posting a lot of new content there, from extended versions of this show to behind-the-scenes stories from my adventures all over the world with Vice. Now, the best part, it's free if you sign up now. So go to shanesmith.substack.com and enter your email. That's it, shanesmith.substack.com. Or click the link below, which rhymes with Bazango.